Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our startup series again. Today, we are diving into thrilling world of India's deep tech science tech sector, a pulsating heart of innovation. It is where AI marvels and groundbreaking biotech discoveries, among others, create epicenters of innovation that's impossible to ignore. India's deep tech science tech sector has drawn over 1 billion in investments in the last 3 years, and it is doubling down every 3 years. We have seen how deep tech is growing in India. Entrepreneurs use technologies like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and material science to solve complex problems. This conversation is about how these sectors like healthcare, agriculture, and energy, where deep science tech solutions are making a big difference. This growth shows the trust in India's talent and innovation. Today's conversation is all about the challenges to speed up deep tech growth in India and how to navigate them. As you know, this episode of the Startup Series is based on the India Deep Tech Science Tech Report by Ankur Capital. And I have shared it on LinkedIn earlier, and they had a lot of engagements. A lot of people were very interested to know what is happening in the deep tech overall. So I'm very pleased to have my guests today, who are the authors of the report, to help us break down the report and understand what is happening in the deep tech ecosystem, what is India's deep tech system is all about, how you can leverage, how the founders and investors both can leverage it to go and leverage and make this really deep tech as a next frontier for India's growth story. I am Govind Kedia and I run Arctic Invent, which helps companies increase their enterprise value by way of building business centric IPR portfolios. My company Arctic Invent has worked with more than 1,000 plus deep tech startups from Europe, US, India, helping them massive value on their product and technologies by getting their patents and trademark around the world faster and the most cost efficient manner. And we have been helping with a lot of deep tech startups in the past. Now let's together and discover how these breakthroughs are not just transforming India, but also setting the stage for tech revolution. Now, my first speaker, Vishal Kataria, is an associate deep tech with Ankur Capital Investment Team. He leverages his research background to evaluate deep science tech innovation. Vishal focuses on technologies for climate change migration, mitigation, energy transition, and advanced computing. I also want to welcome Suraj Nair, works at Ankur Capital Investment Team. I've known Suraj for a long time now. We have met a couple of times. He has experience spans across biopharmaceutical, market research, and consulting. Suraj is driven by passion for science and technology and believes that innovation is key to societal development. Welcome to Startup Series, both Suraj and Vishal. You know, you are the authors of the report. I know that you are of course with the team, worked very closely while writing this report. Uh, but before we go any further, why don't you share a brief about your journey with Ankur Capital in your India's deep tech ecosystem and your experience in the ecosystem? That would be good place to start today.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Govind. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having us. And yeah, just a brief about myself. As you said, my previous avatar was as a researcher where I was doing my PhD, and I decided I want to do something more kind of connected to the real world. So I'm relatively new to the Indian deep tech space, and I joined Ankur Capital not too long ago. But it's been really exciting to bring that, I guess, scientific temper or that kind of approach to evaluating companies from a techno-commercial lens. And it's been interesting translating those kind of core research skills into a more, how does this work in a factory or a real world rather than how does this work in a lab perspective.
Great, great. Suraj,
Thanks, Govin. First of all, for inviting us to this LinkedIn Live. I think exciting times to be building in deep tech for sure. Deep science tech, I think, is what we should call it. But I guess my journey at Ankur. It's been a couple of years. I joined Ankur in November 2021, and I can tell you honestly, even before joining Ankur or after joining Ankur, I had no idea about what deep tech means, what deep tech stands for. And today, as we speak, I think we've done quite a lot of work, and we've come a long way. Where deep tech has sort of become like the buzzword, right? So I think it's been a very exciting journey, and really happy to have been involved in this particular journey. Right? We've always spoken about innovation, and innovation not actually coming from the country, and it's actually heartening to see over the last, at least over the last maybe couple of years or so, we've seen lot more work happening, lot more innovations coming out of the labs, institutes in the country, and so yeah, it's definitely the most exciting time to be building deep sciences and to be involved in the ecosystem in whatever way possible.
Great. No, thanks, Suraj. Thank you setting the tone. Before we start having more deeper conversation, just a reminder to all our audience: put your questions and comments because it's very fluid. We'll be more than happy to have your questions and discussions and whatever you want to ask Suraj and Vishal. More than happy to take up in the conversation. And also, like you said, Suraj and Vishal, very exciting times. And in fact, I was in Startup Mahakumbh today, and there was a special deep tech, place and a lot of activities happening around this entire, narrative of, like you said, deep science, is what is more important to say, right? So I think that is something we are going to talk a lot more. Now let's start. Of course, this has been very uh, base question for all of us, but I'll still go ahead and do that. Let's start defining deep science tech company. What exactly and who exactly are they? In the report you mentioned that they create first of a kind technology platform, are more mature in terms of technology readiness levels, and offer large market opportunities. Can you expand that for us? What exactly, in context of investment, in context of India, how do you define this entire deep tech or deep science technology in your report, and how you looked at it as a whole? So, Vishal, Suraj, take a call. Who wants to go first? Please
Yeah,
go
sure.
ahead.
I'll go first. Thanks, Govind. I think that's a really interesting question. And when we decided to write this report or even ideate, we knew that the first thing we had to address was how do we define deep science tech? And as you rightly said, these are companies that, at least the way we think of them, is that they are companies that come from years of R&D. So they're bringing some sort of science and technological fundamental innovation to the table, which is what enables them to create these first of a kind technology platforms. And because of that, their journey is characterized by graduating up the technology readiness levels or the technology readiness journey. And by virtue of the fundamental innovation being kind of basic and wide reaching in the sector or the field or the subject that they're in, they end up creating these platforms, and they end up spinning off, or at least they are capable of spinning off multiple products that are able to kind of address different problem statements in different markets. And at a very high level, that's what we think of deep science tech. And I think, of course, there are different labels and different definitions that people have. And there are other labels that kind of overlap. Like some people talk about hardware tech as hard tech, which also to some level like overlaps with deep tech. But I think for us internally, the reason to define this is for us to have internal clarity on the fact that these companies have unique journeys, have unique needs, and they need kind of a different model for us as an investor to evaluate, to study, and to work with eventually as well. So yeah, over to you, Suraj, if you want to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it sort of comes down to the technology differentiation, right? And how do you define the differentiation that has been built in the technology? So all the R&D work that these companies go through, that helps them really create that technology differentiation. And then there are ways in which you can actually define strategies to protect that differentiation, right? So patents or any other form of IP, you can leverage that to protect that differentiation that you've created from a technology perspective, right? And I think that becomes key when you define deep science technology companies. In fact, the one of the key filters that we've applied when looking at companies for this particular report was around how protectable, the IP that these companies are developing. How protective are they? right? So that's been one of the key sort of learnings for us when we tried defining deep science tech companies. So core innovation, differentiation in the technology, meaningful differentiation in the technology, which can be protected through a robust patenting strategy. I think that sort of, in short, it would be the definition of a deep science tech company.
Sure. No, great. I think taking a cue from the conversation you had. Now, of course, since the conversation is also about India deep tech and how we can leverage the ecosystem. So, in your view, what are the big opportunities for Indian deep tech when it comes to building IP and technology, especially on the science side? And from an investor point of view, like you already mentioned, that it is very, very important to have some defensibility. Of course, that's one aspect to it. But what other than that, as investors, when you look at deep science, uh, how do you really look the IP angle to it? Of course, not all the time will be patents or trademarks. We always say that being in the IP industry, that may not be the only thing. Of course, there are a lot of other IP elements in the business, right? Uh, so again, the question is, what are the big opportunities here for Indian deep tech startups, and how, as an investor, what's the lens for it? That would be really interesting to know about.
Do you want to just continue, Suraj? I think you were
Yeah,
halfway
Suraj, I
to
think
answering that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think the other factor that comes into play is, the problem statement that you're sort of working on, right? So one thing which we've realized is, you need to be looking at larger problem statements that need to be solved, right? And so if it's a larger problem statement, it requires a deeper solution that can address that large problem, right? And so I think solving for a larger problem, which means that you are looking at a much larger opportunity here from a market size perspective, I think becomes key. And so from there on, how differentiated your technology is to be able to solve that large problem sort of follows from there, right? Differentiation in terms of the product, I think also having a clarity on how large of a problem are you solving from a VC perspective, especially, I think it makes a lot of difference because you would ideally want deep science companies to be solving larger global problems, and so looking at larger market opportunities. So even though the journey is risky, the risk to reward ratio still sort of makes sense for venture capital asset class to invest into these technologies, right? So I think I mean, for VCs, it's always been about, what's the risk that you're taking and what's the reward that you seek at the end. And for deep sciences, I think, if it's a large enough opportunity, the risk that you can manage also sort of increases, and so you the reward at the end is much higher than what you typically expect in a science tech kind of a company. So it's always a balance of that.
Okay, thanks. Vishal, your take on this?
Yeah, no, not much to add, to be honest. I think Suraj did a good job of answering that.
No,
Yeah.
great. So I think very, very interesting, Suraj, what you mentioned about, looking at the larger picture, and India being, of course, one of the largest population. I think I'm sure there are a lot of deep science technology problems that needs to be solved, right? I think that, of course, is a very, very big, in terms of thinking about this entire ecosystem, talking about deep tech in India, and the conversation about it, right? Now, of course, there's a lot of confusions around the journey of a deep science technology company, right? There's this fundamental research, and then there is this, like you already have this conversation around the technology maturity level, right? And or the readiness level, so to say, right? So from an investor's lens, again, of course, if you can help us understand how you look at the journey of a deep tech, right? Of course, there's some bit of basic research. If you have to look at the, like, the ideal journey of a deep tech startup, right, in terms of readiness level, where you would be interested to talk to a startup, right? can you, and you did touch upon it in your report, right? So I do want you to also share some insights that, if founders are at that stage of, or whatever stage they are in, they can kind of look at, okay, how do you look at deep tech as a, in India at least, of course, from the grant raise and all those conversations, right? So help us understand a bit more around the journey in India in the deep tech space.
Cool.
And
Yeah, I
some
think that's a
example would be great. I mean, without taking names, if you can share some real life, uh, cases, that would be really useful for our audience today.
yeah. So I mean, that's a really broad-ranging question, I think, Govind, where yeah, I think the way we see it is that obviously with these technology readiness levels, or from starting from TRL1 to TRL9, there's different levels of de-risking that are happening. So we think of it as initially starting off with a science de-risking, and I'm assuming that there's already some sort of scientific breakthrough that's been made, whether that's done by someone privately or whether that's done in a university or in a corporate R&D setting. Once that's done, obviously you have to, this is a scientific breakthrough. There's a lot of translation that has to be done to bring this to the real world. So initially you're going to have to de-risk the science aspect of it, which means if it's working as a lab bench idea, or if it's a very, early stage AI model, which works on a subset of data, you first have to get it, you first have to de-risk the science and make sure the efficacy is actually something that can be replicated. Now, once you move on from that, then there is engineering risk that you have to overcome or mitigate. This involves creating a product that is robust, ensuring that you're making the right material, the right process choices, ensuring that you're starting to think about economic viability, that you're starting to think about how the manufacturing process is going to be at scale, or how the deployment is if it's something like a digital technology. And lastly, you're coming to a more of an execution risk, where here now it becomes more of a mainstream company of, hey, you have a science, you kind of know it works, you've also productized it, the product fits into certain niches, the product works in certain conditions, whether it's temperature, pressure, all of that. And then you have to execute that at scale. So whether that's delivering a diagnostic device, whether that's installing a stationary battery storage system, or whether that's getting a precision fermentation plant to work, all of those are in the larger scale execution level. So from our lens, obviously, or rather, let me zoom out. There's going to be different stakeholders that a deep science or a deep tech company is going to interact with at every stage of this. So as you said, Govind, obviously, initially it's going to come from grants. It's going to come from government funding, CSR funding, support from incubators and early stage accelerators, which is going to start mitigating some of that initial science risk. And post that is when an investor at our stage would come in, because we invest at the seed stage. We would be interested in kind of moving or kind of crossing the bridge of science to engineering risk. And beyond us as well, there's going to be other players involved. There's going to be other growth stage investors. There's going to be industries and strategic investors who are interested in using these deep technologies in their business units. And beyond that, there's other larger partners as well who are going to help with the manufacturing or going to help with the distribution and so on. So there's a lot of stakeholders that the deep science tech company will have to interact with. And from our perspective, I guess we are happy to chat with anyone even pretty early, because what we've realized is these are difficult to understand sometimes. Technology is difficult. And they're difficult because they're brand new. They're creating entirely new markets. So we like to talk to companies and founders quite early so that we can start to also internally kind of absorb, assimilate, understand what they're building. And when the time comes, we have enough information, enough confidence to have conviction to take the next step. So yeah, that's a little bit about like how it works. And I think we also have this graphic that we work quite hard on for the report, which talks about the different de-risking, the different stakeholders that you're working with, and the different stages of the product that you might have. So starting from lab bench to prototype to product to large scale product.
Sure. No, great. I think, Suraj, I have a very small, like a tangent question, from an investor point of view, and in context of India, right? So how do you see that the basic science is, let's say, well established, or let's say it has been proven, uh, and it's now moving to the engineering phase. Have you seen failures in the past where, okay, in the lab it works, but in the real world it does not work, or you felt that, okay, so what has been your experiences, that how difficult is journey from basic science to the engineering problem, right? Because I think basic science to lot extent, I'm sure, universities are doing it. Somebody has done it in the other universities, or wrote a research paper about it. So what has been your experience in the Indian kind of context? How good we were so far when you research all these data? How good we were from moving from basic science to the engineering side? That would be very, very interesting to know.
So that is, to me, I think, the most challenging phase for any deep sciences, right? Deep science company, right? So because it's almost like writing a research paper versus actually launching a product, right? So in the universities, you can have whatever internal sort of validations done, and then you can publish a research paper, right? But if you have to convert science into product, right, the key thing to understand here is that you need to be able to validate the product, right? And so validation means different things for different kinds of startups, right? If it's a company which is into say like a very regulated market, think of drug discovery, for example, or diagnostics that way, right? We are talking about these companies having to do extensive clinical trials, right? Because it's a science driven product, you need that much of data to prove statistically that this product actually works, that this product works in different field conditions, right? Day or night, low temperatures, high temperatures, whatever real field conditions are required for this product to work, it actually works in these conditions. So you are talking about massive amounts of unbiased data that needs to be generated around the validity of this product, right? Around the efficiency of the product, right? And so the journeys for deep science companies are actually slightly different depending on which type of market you are working in. But the crux of the idea is to be able to generate third party validation data for your product before it becomes ready to be commercialized into the market, right?
Mm.
So a company like into the energy storage part, they need to do pilots with larger companies, right? Larger industries, for example. They need to be able to generate data in field conditions, saying showing that that their product actually works. These are the efficiency numbers. This is what the energy densities are, power densities are, for example, right? So all these data points, on-field data points, need to be generated before the product can even be launched into the market, right? And this is true for any science-driven company, right? In fact, this is true for any product, but especially when it comes to deep sciences, because your claims are high, your claims are about breakthrough innovation. You need to be able to come up with extensive data sets to be able to prove that your product actually works, right? So stakes are actually much higher. And so obviously a lot of companies face challenges here, right? Challenges could be multitude, right? So from basic things like being able to arrange the raw materials that is required to be able to just do the initial level of scale up, all the way up to being able to talk to the right industry partner and get a pilot underway. A lot of challenges that you see companies face during this particular phase. And I think if you are able to generate this particular data set, then you've as for a deep science company, I would say it's crossing a big barrier towards commercialization, right?
Sure.
uh, and we've seen this with our companies, we've seen this with a lot of companies we've spoken to. I think this remains like the major challenge. This is where, when we talk about ecosystem development, I think this is where ecosystem help really comes into play, right? Folks like you guys, right? Where when the company is looking at IP protection, right? Having the right partners to be able to suggest them the right strategies, right? Whether you do one patent, whether you do multiple patents, how do you protect your core technology, how do you protect the different applications of your technology? So there's a lot of design thinking there's a lot of work that needs to go behind the scenes in partnership with other ecosystem players for a deep science company to succeed, right? I think that's going to remain the crux of the matter here, right? The reason that we've only seen very few deep science companies even scale in India until now is because most companies fail at this particular stage, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Right.
the more ecosystem comes in, the better probability that these companies will go to the next stage.
Yeah. No, great. I think great insight, and I think that's where the opportunity is here because the cost of failure is still lower in India, right? I mean, as compared to other markets, I think that cost to failure is still lower, and probably you'll survive, right? So I think that's a very great insight. Very interesting question from Marek. I think maybe I can take this question and then maybe go on. So Marek says, "Hi guys, I represent hardware and a photonic focus investor with European, US, and Canada. Can you comment how much, in your view, a deep tech startup is correlated with a hardware and IP-driven company? As I'm listening to you talking about TRLs and engineering challenges, I would assume you are a hardware friendly. Question two: what are the sectors you see that deep tech startups are competitive? Tech startups are competitive in a global perspective. Um, we are going to cover the tech sectors anyway, so we can skip this question because I have that in context of the report. But what about the first question? I think that is something maybe you want to quickly answer that, and we'll move to the next question, next section.
Vishal, you
I
want to take
think,
this up?
yeah, sure, sure. So thanks, Marek, for that question. I think we are definitely hardware friendly. We like to invest in hardware startups, hardware innovations, whether that's in semiconductors, whether that's in energy storage materials, whether that's in diagnostics and other health or biotech products. However, I think we don't exclusively think of deep tech as hardware because we also see AI powered digital technologies can be created with this deep science tech approach. So a lot of the deep science tech that we are looking at will be hardware, but not all of it. But I think IP is something that we consider to be kind of a non-negotiable with deep science tech companies that we look at, and that's even part of the way we define it in the report. And I think this is definitely true for the three of the four technologies we look at, but the only place it gets a little bit difficult is in the AI space, where obviously at this point, I think Govind, you know much better than us, but algorithms are not as amenable to IP-based protection as other hardware. But I think we still think so. So there, the definition is a bit fuzzy, but I think for us having IP or an IP driven approach is kind of necessary to the way we think of as deep science tech.
Sure. Thanks, thanks, and Marek, you can of course pick up this conversation with Vishal and Suraj offline on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to connect and extend this conversation. Thank you for the question. Now, to the second question, I think let I was planning to do this later, but let's start with this. That you talked about various sectors, but more specifically, few sectors you picked up as the more deep science technology focused. So what I'll do is that probably I'll say that kind of specify the sector. Either one of you pick one of that sector and help us understand, in your view, based on the data and in your in view of investor or a startup centric approach, at what level of maturity they are, what's their future and the road ahead for them, and what should investors should be looking for, and of course what should startup wanting to enter that sector look at doing, right? So the question is, at what maturity they are in, what is the future ahead, what investor look for them, and what should founders or startup who want to enter in this sector should be doing. So that's the four elements of the question, if you want to kind of help us understand. So my first is, of course, the most buzzword is AI. So let's start from there. Who want to go with AI?
Vishal, you are the expert here.
No,
So
okay, fine. Happy to go ahead. So Govind, I think the four aspects you mentioned were the kinds of innovations, what investors are looking for, what are the opportunities, and I guess what are the challenges in this journey. So,
Yeah, and also what
you know,
maturity level they are in. I mean, in
sure.
terms of maturity, what's the future, what investors are looking for, and if somebody wants to enter in this space, is it already gone, or if the passing wind has blown away, or it still look promising if you look from that perspective?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Also, Vishal, before you answer, right, just one quick clarification that I want to make, right? We've not actually classified it in terms of sectors. We've actually looked at it from a technology lens, right? And then we sort of broken it down into, application of that technology in multiple sectors, right? So AI, and then its application in either robotics, or any other sector that we see, healthcare, for example, right? So, I mean, this is one of the exercises that we tried doing, right? Like, list out all the companies, try and map them against, what's the major technology that these guys are trying to build, right? And then what's the sector that should be targeted. So what
Correct.
happens is usually, one company may be working on multiple technologies and also targeting multiple sectors. So then the whole sort of data becomes a bit jumbled to separate out, right?
No,
So
no,
yeah,
my
so just
context
like,
was the same. My context was the same. My context was
yeah.
exactly the same. I did only mean to ask that, okay, when we look at AI and different things, I mean, what is it that we should look at? Yeah. So I think that will also answer Marek's question to some extent, right? So
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, you know, what we, I think this is also, to be honest, this the section we kind of struggled with the most in the report in terms of AI-driven deep science tech. So, yeah. So I think we are looking at, to answer your last question first, I don't think it's too late by any means of, by any stretch of imagination. I think obviously it's a very fast moving field and there's a lot of opportunities. And it's exciting because sometimes it's so fast moving that, something you are doing today is obsolete in 6 months or even a year's time. We are looking from a deep science, deep tech perspective at a couple of different models of AI-driven deep science tech companies that would be interesting to us and in general is causing heavy disruption. So first of all, obviously, is the foundational model approach, which a lot of companies in the West have begun, and this has begun in quite a rapid speed in India as well of late with companies like Kritram and Sarvam. So we see them as building a very deep moat with their foundational models, and this really fulfills what we think of as creating technology platforms, because when you create these models, you're essentially like people are building GPTs on top of GPT. So similarly, other foundational models are creating platforms that unlock large markets. The other type of company we are, or the other type of innovation that we are very interested in is a more vertical or sector specific innovation, which I think is what we have seen a lot more in India in the last maybe 5, 10, even 15 years. Suraj had mentioned a field like robotics. Robotics has seen a lot of AI driven deep tech innovation. So has things like image analysis, in particular for agri with satellite imagery, and this is in fact one of the applications of AI in robotics as well. So we see these sector specific AI applications as also very important, very interesting, because they are able to focus on specific sectors and combine both the AI expertise or those smarts with subject matter expertise. And I think that unique combination is what makes these companies or these approaches really deep science tech. What do investors look for in these companies? I think obviously, from our perspective, we're looking for something that's really disrupting the status quo, something that's addressing a very obvious pain point in terms of something that's too expensive in the context of, like, disease diagnosis, something that's too invasive in the context of um, image analysis, to automate a task that is generally seen as something that only humans can do. So if it's solving that kind of an obvious pain point, obviously that's something that's very important and something that an investor would like to look at. The other thing is going back to what Suraj and we talked about, the defensibility, the moat. if it's possible that you start an AI, a deep science based AI company now, is there a way for you to maintain that advantage, to maintain that defensibility over time is very important. And I think as an investor, that's something that we are very focused on, because obviously you may have a right to win, as we sometimes call it today, but if we're looking at a horizon of 5, 7, or even longer than that, 5, 7 years, or even longer than that, what is your right to win 5 years down the line? And in AI in particular, I think what ends up happening is our current AI approaches in general are very data driven. So we are not looking at rules based AI, we're looking at data driven AI. And the best way to ensure that you have this right to win in the future is to kind of enter a virtuous cycle where you're collecting data, which is making your algorithms better, and you're in that kind of positive hamster wheel of sorts that maintains your right to win. And we've seen this manifest in not just deep tech innovation, but broadly in AI innovation, with a lot of network effects kicking in. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if I answered all four aspects, but I think I did
No, but
cover.
that's good. That's good to give a direction, right? So, but the whole
Mhm.
intent was to just understand the feeling in terms of these sectors, right? I think that was the question that what are the sectors you see that deep tech startups are competitive and kind of more interesting in a way, right? And as Suraj you mentioned, it may not necessarily be the companies, but on the tech side of it. So AI was one bucket of it. Now the
Yeah,
second
yeah.
bucket I had for you was biotech. I know Suraj, you evaluate on biotech side, or so a bit about what's happening in biotech. It's a very big bucket. I understand a lot is happening, but what's your take on biotech as a overall deep tech sector?
So I think just from a tech perspective, you have to think about it, right? Biotech. I think over the last decade or so, we've seen some real, very crucial sort of innovations that have happened, right? Which I think has made biotech real biotech solutions possible today, right? So I think one thing that comes to my mind is obviously the next generation sequencing that came in, right? I think this was early, I think 2007, 8 or so is when Illumina actually started offering this as a service, and early to 2010s is where adoption sort of increased, and so the idea is to be able to do multiple sequences, multiple DNA sequences, sequencing of multiple sequences, right? And so that really accelerated the amount of data, genetic data that was available at the disposal of all the scientists across the world, right? So that was point number one. Then you had gene editing technologies that came in 2013, 14 or so, right? CRISPR. I'm pretty sure most people would have heard about it, right? So now you had this plethora of genomic information that was available. You had technologies through which you could actually figure out ways to manipulate that genomic information, understand more about that information, right? The third thing that has happened is obviously AI, right? So this sort of combination of biotechnology tools and AI coming in to actually make sense of all the data that was being generated, right? When these three factors have sort of come in, now what you see is that there's a lot more understanding of how nature works, a lot more understanding of how bacteria operate, how funguses operate, right? And you have tools at your disposal through which you are able to find ways to develop products using this particular information, right? So I think this is one of this is that time in biotech where now you have data, you have technology, you have analysis, right? And all three have sort of come together and made it possible for a lot of researchers around the world to come up with newer sort of products using biotechnology. One of the key challenges with biotechnology always has been the fact that it's always been much more costly to develop a product through a biological or biotechnological route, right? I mean, think of making proteins or any carbohydrates or fats through fermentation. Back in the day, maybe even 10 years before, if you think about it, it would have been much more costlier to make a product through biotechnological route compared to chemical synthesis, right? So but now I think in at least in high value industrial products, you'll see that biotechnology based processes are have started making sense from a cost perspective, right? And so I think that's what we are seeing globally in biotechnology. Now you are seeing products from agri food all the way up to healthcare, even industrial products being made through biotechnology routes, right? There are companies who make textiles, for example, completely through biotechnological routes, right, using fermentation to grow polymers. And obviously if, proteins are being made, carbohydrates are being made. There's a company which actually is trying to make palm oil using a biotechnology based route, right? So instead of actually growing palm trees, which have been known to be detrimental to the overall ecosystem, right? You can actually develop this in fermenters, right? And so you are now seeing more and more industrial products also being made through biotechnology route, and it's making sense from a cost perspective. I think that's the most important part here, right? There is still some way to go before commoditized products become commoditized products will be made through biotechnology. I think there's still some way to go for that because the technology maturity has not yet reached at that level. But at least for specialty products, high value products, I think biotechnology is there, and I think we are seeing some initial results of that globally. Some successes of that happening globally as we speak. So whether it be diagnostics, therapeutics, agri, food related products, or even industrial chemicals. I think you are seeing more and more. You're seeing biotechnology based solutions coming in, and I think there's definitely a drive of sustainability, reducing fossil fuel dependence. That's one of the key factors which is sort of driving the shift towards using biotech based products, right? And so that's going to continue. The only question is, can technology maturity really accelerate from here on and make biotech processes much more cost effective so that you can start making commoditized products as well? Think of plastics, for example. Yeah, right. Think of ethanol, example. So these could be possibilities, in 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 the near future, right? If once technology maturity happens. So I think we're looking forward for that to happen sooner.
Sure. Now, very quickly, I have two more industries: advanced materials, electronics, and photonics. I mean, so what's your thoughts on these two ones? And then we'll have a few more questions. So, if you can be your like a quick view on these two areas also: advanced materials, and followed by electronics and photonics. So, Vishal, you want to pick advanced
Yeah,
materials?
sure. Sure. Happy to do that. Thanks, Govind, and thanks, Suraj. Um, yeah, so I think again, this is a field that we see to be, first of all, I just want to say heavily affected by AI because, Suraj mentioned biotech is also very affected by AI. And I think obviously we have been creating new materials advances for a long time. Right now, there is a huge demand for better materials, particularly in the energy transition. And we've also seen a lot of investments going to the space tech material space primarily. So historically in India, specifically in the last 10 years, I think majority of the advanced materials that have been built have been, for example, battery chemistries. They have been better electrodes, better electrolytes. There have been improvements in solar panel technology, solar panel coatings, and in fuels, propellants, and other kind of space applications. So here, what what's been driving this, apart from the need for this, is also the ability to discover these new materials in a better or at in an accelerated way, particularly with AI-powered materials discovery. And I think we will continue to see this play out in a very similar way because the need for better materials for the green energy transition and for industrial decarbonization still remains as urgent as it was. And just the one thing I wanted to highlight, which was quite interesting from our findings from the report in this space, was despite a kind of macro funding, um, not winter or downrun last year, we saw the advanced companies that were powered by advanced materials technologies were relatively unaffected by it. And this was
Mm.
both true for the fresh investments rounds as well as the follow-on investment rounds. And that I think is an interesting sign that this is a, in a good year, this may be an even hotter topic than it was last year. And with respect to electronics, photonics, again, I'll be quick. I think this is where India as a country is really looking to ascend the value chain. So for a long time, we have been kind of the back office of sorts for global electronic semiconductors companies. And on the other hand, our domestic demand is huge, but our next to oil, electronics is our biggest import bill. So there is a huge push from our government, from industries, and that translates down to startups as well to build new semiconductor IP from India and ascend from just providing services to providing world-class products. And I think that's being played out in different kinds of products. So it can be extremely high-end products like chips, accelerators for AI training. It can be kind of mid-range stuff, which is AI inferencing at the edge for IoT, for ADAS car, self-driving car systems. And it can also be in I don't want to use the word mundane, but in slightly lower end things like just embedded electronics, more secure cores, better components for data centers for other electronics. And I think we see this space really accelerating a lot because a lot of the things are aligning from a government, investor, startup, demand, market, industry, corporate participation, all of them coming together. And the investments in the last 10 years have been quite minimal in this space, and I think that's to be expected. But with the concerted effort coming through, we see this space to be one of the most accelerating spaces among the four technologies that we've looked at. And just a disclaimer: this is a space that we are relatively new to, so I think it was very instructive for us to learn more about the technologies and the markets as we were writing this report. So yeah, just in the interest of time, I kept
So
it
great.
short for these two technologies.
No, thanks, Vishal. And I think very, very interesting. I think one perspective that I do have is that, of course, since India being talent rich, and of course, the cost of experimentation may not be as high as in the Western countries, I think it does make sense that these companies will take a lot more interest globally, and I think exit will be much easier or much. I think going to be very, very interesting space. Of course, these technologies take a lot of time to build. I think deep tech has to be a patient capital. I'm sure all the investors in such of the things, of course, are aware that it's a very long journey that they have to sail together. Um, and of course investment definitely, like you said, prove that there is a market, there's an interest, like alternative materials, like you said, that uh, investments are indicator of the interest, right? So I think that's really a great sign. Now we have 10 minutes. I do want to finish exactly on time. Merrick has one question, but I think you may want to take up on the comments or maybe address that after the session, because it's a very, very interesting question. So I would not take it, but Marek, I think you definitely want to connect to Suraj and Vishal and myself. More than happy to get the answer to those questions, right? Now, some of the good things. I think maybe Suraj, you want to talk about good things. What are the good things in Indian deep tech or deep science ecosystem, and what deep tech founders can really leverage for their advantage, right? And which you believe are really, really important for us, India, as a next level of deep science technology companies coming out of it. So share some secrets, some good things, what are underutilized areas that founders should be doing.
Right. That's an interesting question, Leah. So just thinking aloud here, right? So I think one of the things that I've observed that really works well, especially for deep tech founders, is support at the early stage, right? And I think especially when you write the first proposal to an incubator saying, hey, this is what you want to do, and this is what your idea is, this is who your team are, and your team members are, co-founders, all of that. I think there's a certain journey that you have to go through just to convert an idea into a prototype, right? And I think today in India we do see there's a lot of support that's available out there, right? You have lab spaces that are available, for example, right? I know this is very basic, but it's actually important for a science-based company, right? Good thing is, there are two types of incubators that are available. One which sort of reside inside the university, so you have access to some level of infrastructure. There are obviously challenges in getting access to a lot of that infrastructure for sure, but you are at least better placed than before, right? So that's one. Then there are private incubators where again you have these lab spaces that are available for you to do all your initial level of experimentation, and things of that sort. The other thing that we've seen is, there are accelerators or venture studio kind of models that are coming up now, right? Where essentially what's happening is, one of the challenges that deep tech companies face is, let me just put it this way, lack of the right set of talents to come in, right? So not just from a technical perspective but from a non-technical perspective as well, right? And so early in their journeys it usually becomes difficult to get the right set of people, right? So venture studios, accelerators sort of help in that in some ways, right? Connecting you to the right networks outside the technical network that the founder might be coming from, right? I mean, think of a biotech founder, right, coming from a very typical, PhD background. Spent his or her whole life in the lab. Just to be able to think of converting science into a product and then building a billion-dollar company out of it is a monstrous thought itself, right? And so I truly believe that the founder alone would not be able to sort of think about it on his own, on his or her own, right? So I think that's where the role of venture studios or accelerators come in, and we've seen examples of people who've gone through these different accelerators, and small programs around just teaching them the basics of a startup journey, right? Those make a big difference when they pitch to investors. The language that they speak, right? Simple things around storytelling, for example, right? How do you talk to non-technical people about the work that you're doing in a way that it doesn't sound gibberish, or it doesn't come out as something that folks don't want to listen to, right? And so I think there's a huge role being played by these accelerators, incubators, and venture studios, who train the startup founders, especially deep tech startup founders in these aspects, right? And I think um, that's a very crucial part of the ecosystem that sometimes goes unnoticed, right? But I think it's very important, and we've seen examples of that, and we've actually clearly seen examples of folks who've not gone through that versus ones who've gone through these accelerators, incubators, and the kind of difference that it can actually make, right? Just in terms of the way you are able to tell your story. And so I think those are good things about the ecosystem and about being able to build in India, right?
Sure.
And obviously the other part is capital efficiency, right?
Sure.
You know, funds that go into early stage, very very early stage, and the amount that is required to just build a first prototype of your product in India versus globally, I think there's huge, differences in terms of just the
Yeah.
quantum of money that goes into developing the first prototype, right?
Sure.
I think that's a significant advantage in India, right?
Mm.
And so I think, yeah, this is a couple of thoughts that came to me when you asked me
Sure.
good things about the ecosystem in India for sure.
Thanks, Suraj. And now the difficult, even more difficult question for you, Vishal, is what are the areas which needs some improvement, which you believe deep science technology companies in the ecosystem are really, facing. Of course, one obvious complaint is the quantum of the money is available, right? I mean, like check size is not still large enough for the deep tech startups. But what else? I mean, I don't want to bias your comments, but yeah, some areas of improvement. I think that would be our last question before we do the takeaways for the today.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think that's equally as important as what Suraj just said, because and the way we think about it is it's not necessarily demerits of the ecosystem. I think it's just that some things have caught up and some things are yet to catch up. So this is just a reflection of the fact that things are pretty immature right now. And as you said, obviously capital is one of the big things. And I think the way I would view it is a bit differently, where maybe if you asked everyone this question 5, 6 years ago, there were only a handful of funds doing deep tech investments at the seed stage. Now we're very glad to be part of a community of many seed stage deep tech investors. So despite the relative lack of growth stage deep science tech investments, I think what's going to happen is this cycle is just going to repeat at that growth stage. And maybe if we have the same LinkedIn live 3 years down the line, we won't have this as a demerit necessarily. Um, we've also, a lot of the times when we think about the ecosystem in India, we kind of draw inspiration from other ecosystems globally. And one thing that is also relatively lacking is the participation from corporates and potential strategic players in spaces. And again, this is something that is changing. I think we're seeing increased corporate participation in the deep tech spaces. Biotech historically has had a lot of this participation. We've seen it more and more now with energy companies, much more than in the past, where we had, for example, when the solar prices reduced a lot. We didn't see that coming a lot from startups. But I think now when we see kind of learning rate improvements in battery costs and so on, we see that coming from startups. And the corporates are also now willing to step up and play a bigger role. So despite that being not super great right now, I think the signs are again good for that to improve. Um, Talent is something that again I will mention, because despite India no doubt has great talent across the four technologies that we have covered. But I think deep tech startups have difficulty kind of retaining that talent, and that comes from multiple places. One is obviously many times you're competing with an academic job that the person you want to hire is already has. And many times you're competing with a kind of more secure or a more stable job at a large company's R&D wing. So I think the narrative kind of has to shift a bit for these early deep tech startups, deep science tech startups to retain the top talent. So I think these are maybe three examples of uh, places which will have improvement in the next couple of years with regards to this ecosystem.
Well, I think talent retention and talent finding is one topic that you can talk hours and hours and finding solutions. And I think a very relevant topic. A lot of startups we work with. I think, in fact, we had this conversation with them that how patents can actually use for harvesting some of the talents, and we have done some bit of things. And I know the struggle is real, right? That how you find a good talented, deep science who understand the science of it and help you improve. So very well covered. Thank you, Vishal, for bringing this. Probably we'll do some kind of conversation around that topic. But we are almost out of time. We could not feel it was 1 hour gone by. I wish we could have this conversation even longer, but it has been pleasure to host you both. But as always, before I let you go, of course, I do want you to share some bit of like a very short insights. Of course, we encourage people to download the report and go through it. But during the building this course of report that you have done, I mean, you have crunched a lot of data since 2010. I can see in the methodology. What has been your learning? In terms of deep tech in India or overall, what has been your kind of insight that you would want to share, and probably paper are not the best forms to share that. So very quickly, very shortly, whatever you want to share with our audience as our takeaway, or you want to share some really deep insights from the report, that would be really useful in closing this conversation.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just share a quick tidbit and then I'll leave it to Suraj. So, one of the things we found, which you'd also mentioned in the intro, is that the quantum of investments, if we take 3-year periods, it is doubling in every 3-year period. And I think that's a very key, that's a very telling number for the entire ecosystem. And something else that was really interesting was the fact that if you take investment rounds larger than $5 million, the number of those rounds in 3-year periods was also doubling. So that kind of, it made us rethink about the common way we think about, hey, there's no growth funding, it's just not happening. But that the number of rounds is doubling, and that was very surprising. And I think it was a very good sign, very heartening for us to, as especially as an early stage investor and participant in the ecosystem. So yeah, that was a surprising fact, but very welcome fact. Over to you, Suraj.
I think I would say there's something about timing here, right? If you think about the first generation companies, started off in 2010 or thereabouts. I mean, you're talking about 10, 12, 13 years for these companies to actually raise growth funding. Okay, so most of the growth funding has actually happened 2020 and post that, right? So you are talking about 10 years and beyond, and I think most VCs won't be comfortable with that sort of a journey. I can tell you that, right? So, but there's the thing about timing, right? So now that it looks like there's a lot more interest from the overall ecosystem, right, to enable deep science innovations to hit the markets. I think those timelines are going to shorten as we go into the third century, right? So the third decade of this century. So my view is, from whatever we've seen, obviously investment numbers have increased over the last few years, right? And the timelines for subsequent fundings have also shortened, which means there's more and more funding interest that's coming in, right? And so over the next maybe decade or so, we should be able to reduce the timelines for success for these companies, right? I don't think we'll be waiting 10 years to actually see whether a drug company in India is able to launch a product, or whether a battery company in India is able to get their product commercialized, right? So I think those timelines are definitely going to shorten. Is what we are seeing, and what we definitely believe, right? So I think we'll look forward to how that sort of pans out, and hopefully there will be more and more growth funding happening in the next few years for all the first set of companies which have got seed funding, right? Once these companies go to the next stage, which is your growth phases, I think then that gives confidence to the overall ecosystem, the next set of founders to start building disruptive solutions. So I think it's about that cycle, and the first and second cycle to sort of cross certain barriers, so that then it becomes a norm rather than an exception for building deep sciences.
Great insight, Suraj and Vishal. And it was very interesting. All through the live, there were very good audience, a lot of live audience, more than 50, 40 plus people. Thank you for making the time valuable for all of them. It has been really pleasure hosting you today, and I hope people will enjoy the report, and they are free to reach out to you for any further questions. And I'm sure a lot of questions I may not be able to pick up from different people. I'm sure please help them with more insights, and stay connected, and look forward to the next set of report in the next 3 years, how it really changed the entire ecosystem. And thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Govind. And thanks again to everyone who's joined the live. Thanks a lot for listening to us. Thanks for having us, Govind. And yes, as Govind said, if you have, please do read the report. And if there's anything, please feel free to reach out to either Suraj or me. We're very happy to chat.
Sure. Thanks, Vishal. Great. Thanks, Suraj, for being here. And all audience, you can follow both Suraj and Vishal through the links in the comments, and follow me and Arctic Invent through the links and in the comments. And do ring the bell, so that you of course get the next update for our startup series. We make effort to make one or two in a month with very, very good topics. Please feel free to write to me if in case you feel there is a topic you would want to cover. More than happy to do that. And thank you for all the support. I see you in the next episode. You can follow me on the LinkedIn or connect with me. I'm more than happy to connect. And I'll catch you in the next episode. Have a good day.